Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to present to you our case study about forensic toxicology. Our group members is Shafin Danish, Muhammad Ihsan Shahmi, me Ahmad Azwa, and Suhaili. Our topic is about toxicology in hair. Since our topic is about forensic toxicology, it is most related to drugs. I will explain to you first about drug-facilitated crime. Drug-facilitated crime involves the usage of psychoactive substance to alter victims' consciousness, memory, or the ability to resist. Usually, the suspect drugs the victim so that the victims obey the suspect's instruction. So during that phase, the victims cannot resist what the suspect do to him or her. Usually, standard toxicological about drug-facilitated crime uses blood or urine sample to evaluate the presence of the drugs in the body. However, problem is the drugs might have been discarded from the body even before the report has been made. Usually, drugs, when it's inside the blood, it takes about 2 to 3 days before it discarded from the body, same as urine. Some drugs like GHB, zolpidem, or ketamine are often discarded from this fluid by the time the victims make a report. This usually makes it difficult for forensic to determine whether it is actually the victims under the influence of drugs. However, besides bloods and urine sample, hair also can leave imprint of drug usage. During the hair formation, drugs that circulating throughout the body might get trapped inside the hair keratin during its formation. It will leave the drug inside the hair. Since our hair usually grows 1 cm per month, this can put a timeline whether the times when the victims having the drugs. Therefore, hair analysis becomes crucial forensic tools for drug-facilitated crime investigation, especially when the biological evidence is no longer available. It is usable for the forensic toxicology to have new approach to analyze drugs usage in the victims or suspect.
I will explain the hair collection protocol used in this journal. Hair samples were collected by trained forensic professionals 4 to 6 weeks after the suspected exposure. This delay allowed the drug-exposed hair segment to emerge from the scalp since hair grows about 1 cm per month. The sample was collected from the posterior vertex region because this area has the most stable growth rate. The lock of the hair was tied with string to preserve the exposure timeline, cut close the scalp using clean scissors, and carefully labeled to maintain forensic chain of custody. The next phase was hair sample preparation. First, the hair was washed twice in dichloromethane to remove external contaminants and confirmed through drug incorporation inside the hair shaft. The hair was then cut into 1 cm long segments, with each segment representing approximately 1 month of drug exposure. Next, the hair was finely cut into pieces smaller than 2 mm to improve extraction efficiency. About 10 to 20 mg of hair were used. Internal standards were added for accurate quantification, and methanol was added to extract drug molecules from the keratin matrix. The sample then underwent ultrasonic treatment, overnight incubation, centrifugation, and nitrogen evaporation to maximize drug release. Separate the drug containing liquid and concentrate the final extract before. The prepared samples were analyzed using LCMS, a highly sensitive instrument used to detect and measure very small trace level of drugs in hair sample. This method was chosen because drugs in hair are often present at extremely low concentration. The analysis measured substances such as amphetamines, opiates, cocaine, cannabinoids, and sedative, while broad spectrum screening was also performed to identify unknown substance and new psychoactive drugs.
Hi, I am Ehsan, and I will discuss the strategic recommendations for improving investigations in drug facilitated crimes, especially through the use of hair toxicology analysis. First, hair analysis is extremely important because blood and urine only provide a short detection window. In many DFC cases, victims report the incident very late, meaning blood and urine may already be negative. Hair analysis solves this problem because drugs can remain detectable in hair for several months. It is also useful to detect repeated or chronic exposure, especially in vulnerable victims such as children or elderly when they cannot do anything about it. So we can determine the timeline and the time period that the crime happens. Just example, there is a case where hair samples were collected from a 12-year-old child who had been placed in a children's home. Urine toxicological screening revealed that there is a presence of cannabis, indicating recent use, which is like within less than 1 hour. These findings were complemented with by hair analysis, which detected cocaine exclusively in the distal, which is the tip segment of the hair, at concentrations consistent with past passive environmental exposure. The exposure period for the child was estimated, and this exposure corresponded to a period which the child was living with his father. THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, COOH, and CBD were detected in all hair segments of the child. Next, we look at why delayed collection prevents false negative. Hair grows around 1 cm per month, and the drug-containing segment needs time to emerge above the scalp because drugs are incorporated into hair below the scalp first. So, investigators should collect hair approximately 4 to 6 weeks after the suspected exposure. If investigators collect the hair too early, the relevant segment may still remain under the scalp, causing a false negative result. And also, the delayed collection can link drugs to specific time period by using the segmental analysis of the hair. The first case example is a 3-year-old child who had been placed in the care of her aunt, and she was referred to emergency department and was temporarily under her mother's supervision. The child's medical history was notable for a self-injurious behavior and reduced pain sensitivity. Toxicological screening was performed initially in the emergency department, and it revealed that the presence of cocaine in the child's urine. Hair analysis performed 45 days after the suspected exposure showed detectable concentrations of cocaine and its metabolite, with a decreasing concentration profile consistent with cessation of exposure. And note that the concentration of cocaine and BZE measured in the child's hair were higher than the mother's hair. But in contrast, hair samples were collected from the aunt, and it revealed elevated concentrations of cocaine, BZE, EME, and cocaethylene. These findings strongly suggested that aunt as the primary source of the child's exposure. Another case is a 47-year-old woman reported suspected needle spiking while in a shopping center. Needle spiking is the injection of drugs or intoxicating substances into a person without the person's consent. And then she described sensing a cold liquid on her thigh and subsequently observed a hole and the blood on her trousers. During the forensic examination, no medicinal or toxic substances were detected in blood or urine samples, collected approximately 26 hours after the incident, nor in hair samples collected approximately 8 weeks later. The only thing that got detected from the hair was the prescribed treatment of the woman, which is paroxetine, that she took 10 mg a day. For recommendation, specialized protocols must be developed for vulnerable populations such as children and elderly victims. For children, investigators should analyze not only the child's hair, but also samples from caregivers and household members to identify the source of exposure. But first, investigators should do immediate safeguarding assessment to ensure the child's safety immediately and assess the home environment. They also should identify all caregivers and household contacts and involve child protection authorities early. Segmental hair analysis should be used to determine repeated exposure, chronic abuse, changes after removal from caregiver, and timing of exposure periods. Results also should be interpreted carefully because investigators must consider passive smoker exposure, contaminated surfaces, and breastfeeding of the child. Secondly, protocol for elderly victims. Investigators should compare toxicology with prescription records of the elderly victims because the study found drugs in hair that were not part of victims' medical treatments. And also, if the elderly experience recurrent drowsiness, sudden confusion, and explained falls, investigators should investigate toxicological abuse immediately. And finally, monitor long-term exposure because hair analysis is especially valuable in elderly abuse because many cases involve repeated administration over weeks or months.
Now I'm going to discuss the final result of this 6-year study and our main conclusions. If you look at the pie chart on the screen, it shows the types of drugs found during the study. The lab tested 38 suspected cases and they successfully found drugs in 26 of them. This is a very high success rate of nearly 70%, and most of the drugs found were sleeping pills and anti-anxiety meds like benzodiazepines. The most important here is in many of these cases, standard blood and urine tests completely failed because the victim reported the crime days or weeks later. The drugs had already left their fluids, and hair testing was the only way to find their chemical evidence. Moving on to our final conclusions. As you can see in the first point, hair testing is a powerful backup tool. It works when the blood and urine fail because drugs stay in hair for several months, not just few hours or days. Looking at the second point, this long time frame is what helps us protect vulnerable people. For young children, it helps investigators track down exactly where they were being exposed to drugs like cocaine or THC. For the elderly, by testing their hair piece by piece, scientists could prove they were being secretly drugged over a long period of time rather than just accidentally swallowing a pill once. However, the final point shows we still face some challenge. It is sometimes hard to tell exactly how a child got exposed to a drug. For example, if they got it from the mother before birth or from the environment after they were born. Also, we need better standard rules for testing kids because children's hair is much thinner and absorb chemicals differently than adult hair. In the end, our final verdict is clear. Even though it takes a lot of skill in the lab, hair analysis is an essential tool to get justice for victims who report crimes late.